going to end well with plenty of time to go. Let's take this off and read this. Okay. So I just put down, I mean, these were just off the top of my head in terms of, you know, orientations of travel or directions of travel in terms of where we have to go with human rights thinking. Because, as I say, the big thing is not to think, okay, we have it written down, therefore we have human rights. Like it's written down somewhere. That's just not how it works. That's why I gave you that story of the woman on the floor of the bus 4 days ago. It doesn't matter what's written down. It has to be practiced, enacted, embodied, internalized by people. Otherwise, all of this is kind of meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean something, but it's not penetrating deep enough into the social world to make a huge difference. Vulnerable people who are non-personal. Obviously, we have a problem with human rights not being observed, and large parts of the world are in that boat. So we're in a very privileged part of the world, at least nominally subservience to human rights. Many parts of the world, that's not the case at all. So you've seen in Russia where you have, it's a criminal offence even to describe what they're doing in Ukraine as a war. If I would use that word war in a lecture, I'd literally be charged with a criminal offence. That's really striking as a limited speech or ability to think, say, so on. But we can't just attack the East, although they deserve to be. I mean, ourselves, I mean, in neoliberal capitalism, our story, we have another problem, which is for us, everything is reduced to the level of being a consumer. And we model people within society as though they're consumers. We've lost the language of citizen. Never mind the language of just being human, and by virtue of being human, having rights attached to it. So we're much keener on the idea of consumer, and that comes from our neoliberal ideology, which confers quality on somebody in proportion to their spending on things. So this is why we use this awful term, the taxpayer. The taxpayer demands, the taxpayer. This becomes a new term to replace the citizen, as though if you pay taxes, by virtue of you doing that, you now have a greater say in what should be done, as opposed to the citizen, or even the non-citizen, the resident, who should automatically have rights. So by making everything about consumers, it kind of suggests it's only those who are consuming something have a right over it, a claim on it, as opposed to, in fact, rights being rooted within one being part of a society, being part of that social world. It's not something you earn, you have it. You don't earn the human rights, you just have human rights, if we're serious about it. The human rights are not for the worthy, and they're not for the virtuous. They're for everybody, including the people that we don't like, who look to us like orcs. They can't just be for people like us who earn the human right because they're socially well adjusted and doing the right social, and they live in houses and they don't go around literally. It's got to be for everybody, or else it doesn't work. It's universal or it's nothing. So a universal declaration is not a partial declaration. European declaration is universal for everybody. So I think that's been a huge erosion in the last number of years, really. And I mean, if we think that this isn't the case, if we had 4 hours of a seminar, I give you lots of examples of this way consumerist thinking is reframing our understanding of rights and essentially reducing it as well, I think. There are many, many examples of it, including in the education sector. You always ask, who's in the room? Who's here? Who can come here? Is it you come here just because you can pay? Who can access health service? Is it just because you can pay? Does that get you off the queue? Does that get you better service? I'd love to introduce a two-tier education system just out of pure government. I always think this would be fantastic. I'd have my private students who just pay me personally for the lectures, and I'd have them sitting up here in armchairs, because 2 of them, but they need to pay me vast amounts of money for my private practice. And I'd be talking to them, I'd give them all the handouts, and they'd be having to say to everyone else, keep up. But you 2 guys, I would really be favouring gilt-edged handouts. This is the exam coming up as well. I want you to do well, and everyone else. That would look so kind of provocative to us, and yet that's the health service right there, and many of our services right there. But it would just look so stark were we to do it into this sector. and made that very clear demarcation of two categories of consumers based on their ability to pay. So if you pay me, you know, the transaction, I'm going to look after you a bit more. Pay me, as opposed to some other creature who looks like an orc to me, who I'm not going to treat equal. That's not human rights. That's one other thing. I think there's another odd kind of thing. The philosophical side of my head loves to go here, but this is not from your point. I'm just going to mention it briefly. There is a feature in the hyper-modernity that we're now in, a kind of fragmentation of subjectivity, which I know sounds great, but just let me see, can I explain it a bit, where because we live in a culture that's all about the individual, so neoliberalism prioritizes individual and it models the individual in a particular way. That's not empirically true, but it's still theoretically modeled in this way. People are very self-interested, they're rational, they always know what they want, and they strive after what they want and so on. So many of our social systems are predicated on this assumption about what human beings are. There's no empirical evidence that people are like that, but you can socialize them to be like that. So they end up being like that. Then it becomes a circular affirmation of what you said they are, even though you don't find this in many other cultures. But anyway, at the core of this then is my search for individual identity. Who am I? This now, especially in a digital age of technology, becomes the key right that people seem to claim, the right to being me. So human rights in this sense begins to implode to a narrow point of interior subjectivity. It's about my right to be me, is the number one right. So I have the right to my own thoughts, and right to my own thinking, and dress the way I want, and so on. And that's what human rights mean. And what I demand then as a human rights that you respect my affirmation of myself. And if you don't, you offend me. And to offend somebody is one of the worst things you can do in our culture, which might be to actually just disagree with them, or even more provocatively. And this is a phrase we can hardly even use now in lecture rooms. I'm just going to say it. Strange transgression, just for the purpose of saying it. You're wrong about that. That sentence there. You can hardly say it because you might offend someone. You know, wrong. I have a right to my own opinion. Yes, you do, but you're still wrong. You know, you're still actually wrong about that. 2 + 2 is not 5. It's wrong. So it's 4, and that's just the way it is. Yeah, but I personally think I'm more comfortable with the idea that it's 5. I just can't be with I like 5. Now, I'm being deliberately provocative, but the problem is we have a lot of that in the culture. So we lose the ability to discern truth from falsehood because rights, the language of rights, have migrated into this bizarre affirmation of individual subjectivity. So my subjective view of reality needs to be affirmed by everyone else. Otherwise, you're offending me, and to offend me is the worst thing you can do because now I'm offended and it's just like a disaster. And so we have this strange inability to have a collective speech and collective space where we can have any kind of ability to collectively figure out what to do. And the tragedy of this, of course, is that we are facing the greatest collective challenge in the history of humanity, and we're now totally disabled because your science is your science, and so on and so forth. I mean, at that business affirmation, you might recall, Claude, I mean, this is the epitome of it, where some business guy asked us, when we wanted sustainability, how will you convince business people to respond to the climate threat? And my answer was simple, reality. And the chair intervened to say, well, I'm going to be careful there, your reality and my reality. No, there isn't. There's climate reality. If you don't think that's reality, good luck. Like, you know, water flooding your house, it doesn't care what you subject it to. It's going to do it. So it is simply reality. So the collapse of the subjectivity is making us less capable of managing how we deal with external reality. And I think human rights has kind of gone into this vortex bubble bath and gone seeping out of the bathwater because human rights starts becoming, it's really just about my subjective state, which is not a good way to be. Evolutionary, if that saber-toothed tiger is coming into the room now, we need to all respond. But if we all go, well, I don't know, could be there, could be not there, maybe we can talk to it. No, it'll eat you. It's just going to eat you. That's just the way it is. And our ability to respond is really critical for our survival. So we're becoming maladaptive. So I think there's a human rights decay here into this hyper-subjectivity, which is very troubling. I think we go in bad places and so on. And that's the level of